Hi, welcome to our discussion on hobbies and interests. My name is Danielle Husevelt, registered dietitian and board certified health coach here at Crossover. And I am with Maxine Young today, and she is a certified personal trainer, a registered dietitian, and a board certified health and wellness coach. How are you doing today, Maxine?
Good. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, it's a great topic. So we're going to be talking about the importance of hobbies, finding your interests, how to turn those interests into hobbies. But it's probably really important at first to discuss, why should we have hobbies?
It's a good question, a good place to start. I think personally that hobbies are important for so many reasons, more than we'd even realize. For one, they pretty much help us create a better sense of ourselves. They can improve our quality of life. For instance, they'll give us an outlet. I mean, all of us are dealing with so many stressors in our lives day to day, whether they're work related, personal, just obligations that we feel we have towards other people. And we often, as humans, tend to put all those things first. That really engaging in our interests in a hobby can kind of help us feel more relaxed, happier, passionate, balanced, even productive in the long run, because we feel like we're not just working for others, we're doing something for ourselves. Especially when we're engaging in things that we find fulfilling and we're passionate about. They can also help us feel less lonely. If that's something that you're struggling with, hobbies not only occupy our time, but they give you this opportunity to kind of connect with other people who might share similar interests, especially if you feel like you're the only one in your friend group or work group that has that interest. It's a way to really get in tune with other people who share these similar things. Ultimately bringing a greater sense of purpose, belonging to our lives, filling in those missing pieces we might feel, just getting us to branch out and feeling more engaged to ourselves and possibly even to others.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a lot of benefits to having a hobby. One thing that you called out that really resonates with me is doing something for yourself. So I think you're right. We tend to put everybody and everyone else's needs in front of our own, and having something that's sort of just for you can be really fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very fulfilling.
Yeah. So I heard a little bit about some of your unique hobbies, things like beekeeping, pastry making, running. Tell me a little bit about personally, what are some of the benefits that you saw from pursuing, one or more of those hobbies?
Yeah, I've experienced a lot of benefits. So I'll just touch on the biggest or the ones that I feel like have impacted me the most. For one, some of these hobbies I've had my whole life. Some I only recently had when I moved to the Bay Area. I guess it was over 5 years ago at this point, but it still feels pretty new to me. But when I moved here, I didn't really know anybody. I knew my family, and that was about it. And so, because of that, just feeling a little lonely in a new city, feeling lost, not really knowing this area, I made it a point to find activities that really aligned with my interests, some of the things that I was doing where I lived before. And the biggest thing, I guess the biggest benefit that I got out of engaging in hobbies was that I really created some connections, ones that I didn't expect. I guess some examples, you brought up running. I was a big runner before I moved to this area, and I made it a point to sign up for a half marathon and found this local running group that was really close to where I lived, happened to be there. They had a weekly schedule where you could join as many of the training runs as you wanted. And I found that in that experience, I made instant friends, mainly because you're with people, you're doing these really grueling long runs, you're sweating, you're kind of at your worst physically at that point. But yet you're all sharing this passion, right? And this ultimate goal of let's do our best during this race and let's enjoy it, and cheering each other on. And just kind of that instant bond that you had when you're training for something was a really great way. And there's some people, I haven't run a half marathon since then for many reasons, but there are still people that I'm connected with and we reach out to each other after all these years. What else
So
did you mention? Oh,
yeah, there's
sorry.
that well, there's that piece about the kind of the shared experience, and forming connections that even if you move away from that hobby or activity can really, you know, those connections don't end, right? These are people that you're connected with for a while. I sort of had a similar situation to you. I moved out to the Bay Area. I didn't really know anyone, but one of the hobbies that I wanted to pursue that had been on my mind for a long time was studying Krav Maga. In fact, the Jennifer Lopez movie Enough got me interested
Mm.
in studying Krav Maga. And when I lived in Pennsylvania, there wasn't really a place to study. And so when I moved out into the Bay Area, I thought, well, let me take a look around and see if this is something that's available. It turns out there was a great school that was very close to where I lived and worked. And I was so scared. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but this is now we're, I think, 10 years later. And I've moved since then to a different part of California. But now I've started taking it again because with the pandemic, they started offering virtual classes. So it's so fun. I get to see all of the friends that I used to train with. And yeah, those connections, even after I had stopped training for a period, those connections didn't go away. I still had those, you know, those friends and acquaintances for when we used to train. But we had that shared experience of defending ourselves against one another in class, and it's a good bonding experience.
Yeah, I mean, something like that, just engaging in a hobby can create the foundation for a friendship. It doesn't mean that your entire friendship is based on it,
Right.
but it's definitely a starting point and can take
Totally.
off from there.
Totally. Were there any surprising benefits that you got out of any of your hobbies, like things you were kind of shocked about?
Yeah, I'd say the one experience which led to multiple experiences that comes to mind is that I never really expected a hobby to challenge myself before, or challenge me. Uh, Basically, the thing that I'm thinking about is when I moved out here, I've always been, I mean, as a dietitian, I'm very passionate about, food security. And I've always volunteered no matter where I lived for food banks and things like that. And so I signed up through a website called meetup.com, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, with a group that regularly did volunteering at one of our local food banks. And I guess the person who was leading that group saw how passionate I was about all of this. And a couple of times when the leader couldn't be there, asked me to lead and fill in. And I hadn't really, I signed up being a participant, hadn't really thought about that experience of having some leadership skills, right? But obviously there was something that I was doing that that person saw, mostly about passion, which I mentioned. And so I took over a couple of events and then I realized like I can actually do this on my own too. So I took this idea to our work and said, hey, can I start creating some monthly events and organize people? And I started sending out these emails and getting other people, local workers in the Bay Area. We all work at different areas in clinics and things like that, but I'd bring them together from some volunteer events. It was kind of fun having this like thing that I was in charge of that just kind of came about out of an interest that someone else kind of saw that I was capable of doing. And the best part is not only did I make friendships through the meetup group, but I started meeting people that I never would have met physically because we all work in different buildings, different locations, but they would come together for this event. And so I was, subconsciously networking, I guess, as well at work and didn't realize like that all came about. So being a leader, making new friends, being in contact with people I never would have had contact with before, just from engaging in an activity that I felt, strongly about.
Right. So not only was it giving you, I'm guessing, fulfillment, and allowing you to do something that you're really passionate about, there were also this sort of list of side benefits that you got from developing leadership skills and networking, and even broadening your social network even a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some
In
great
and outside of
benefits.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's awesome. So we've talked about hobbies as being a road to creating fulfillment, doing something for yourself or having something for yourself. We also talked about some of the side benefits or unexpected benefits that can come out of that. We talked about it being maybe an outlet for creativity. Um, Anything else that feels like it's a benefit to having a hobby or interest?
Yeah, things I think that aren't talked about as often is that hobbies can actually be beneficial for our brain and personal growth as well. If we look at research, it's kind of interesting where sometimes whether or not you were interested in activity before, if it's something new, it is ultimately stimulating our minds, stimulating our bodies, and giving us new knowledge, giving us different perspectives on things, which can increase our confidence, our self-esteem. So there's a lot of brain power, I guess we could put it, that comes along with engaging in hobbies. And examples are, let's say you like art and you want to learn how to paint or do something like that. you know Maybe in your mind your goal is, well, I just want to learn how to paint a landscape or something like that, but actually all of those skills that you're using can actually not just foster your creative growth, but actually sharpen your memory skills, your critical thinking skills, your way of conceptualizing things. So you're learning stuff even if you may not realize it, just like I learned some leadership skills and organization skills. But there's a lot of things that actually go on with your brain as well, which is pretty interesting when it comes to engaging in your hobbies.
It really is. I remember reading some information about when you're approaching something with a beginner's mind. So when you're just really starting to learn how to do something, the amount of neuron development within the brain, that's just overall beneficial for brain health. That makes me think of another hobby of mine that I picked up maybe about 6 years ago. I started sewing. My grandmother was a seamstress, and I really wish I would have learned more from her while she was alive. But about 6 years ago, I decided to take up um, sewing, and just what you were talking about, like how it changes how you think about things and are able to conceptualize. When you think about putting a garment together, I sew clothes, and mostly for me, all selfish to talk about. To
I'm
talk
not
about
taking
something
orders
for,
right now.
yeah, not taking any talk about something for just you, totally selfish sewer. But understanding how a garment is put together, and the fact that you sort of have to think about everything backwards. So in order for it to show up looking the way you want it to on the outside, when you're putting it together, you have to think about it in a certain way in terms of garment construction. And at the beginning of it, I wasn't very good showing off those there were a lot of things that went on the scrap pile, let's just put that way. But the more you practice and the more you start to think about how to conceptualize how to put garments together, then kind of the better I got. But there's always more skills to learn, which is also a very cool part. And I like that there's an added benefit to my brain health, that all of that learning is developing new neurons.
And that's what I was kind of saying too about how it can oh gosh, I just blanked for a second, but um, build that confidence, that
Yeah.
self-esteem too, right? Like you said, there were a lot of things that you threw in the scrap pile in the beginning, but as you started to feel more comfortable in learning these skills, you're now like wearing all of your clothes, you're promoting them, you're showing them off and showing your hard work off and stuff like that too.
Right. It's nice. And it's if creativity is something that drives you, having a creative outlet, whether it be sewing or painting or knitting or, whatever, or cooking, right? Just having that creative outlet can be so, yeah, confidence building and empowering. And um, it can be really helpful. And again, you're also getting some great benefits to the brain.
I think physically, another thing that's important to mention is that we touched on this lightly where, you're balancing your life out a little bit more with hobbies, but they can actually promote or help you manage stress too, right? Help you feel a little more balanced. And when you start to do that kind of stuff for yourself, it can actually help with some physical or medical conditions as well. Like we've seen some research that shows that when you're engaging in hobbies, it can help lower your blood pressure, right? You're not as stressed because you're feeling like you're doing those fulfilling activities for yourself. And then when it comes to the brain health that we're talking about, we've actually seen that hobbies can help reduce our risk of depression and dementia in the future as well. So there's so many benefits out there that we just don't even think about. It's not just having fun, which is maybe the best part of them, but we get all these added benefits as well.
Absolutely. The mindfulness also that might come with performing certain hobbies, whether that's like woodworking or running, or the methodical cooking, or in my case sewing. It's so mindful. You have to really be in the moment with what you're doing, and so that can definitely help cut back on maybe some, if thoughts are causing you anxiety or stress, that mindfulness or bringing yourself into the moment with a hobby can be really helpful. Even like coloring, right? It can be, it's creative, it's mindful. So yeah, definitely some great physical and mental benefits to hobbies. So how does somebody get started?
Yeah, that can feel hard sometimes. I'd say the number or the first step is going to be get in tune with what you find interesting. And that can be absolutely anything, anything that you enjoy, maybe you've been curious about and have never had access to, like you mentioned, Krav Maga, anything that you just want to try doing.
Yeah, so scanning what you might be interested in. But what if interests aren't obvious to somebody?
Yeah.
So, maybe they're finding it hard to figure out what they're really interested in. Any tips there?
There's a few questions that I'll encourage people to ask themselves. Um, Maybe this one's a bit obvious, but the first one would just be, what brings you joy? What do you actually like to do for fun? Or what do you think could be fun? I think I mentioned, what are you curious about? If there's any topics that you've wanted to explore. Um, think about your strengths too. Like, what are you good at?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can, once you start realizing, like, hey, these are my strengths, this is what I'm good at, that might lead you into thinking, like, oh, this is an activity I could actually, like, foster or grow myself with. Um, and then I love this question too, is think back, because like we already mentioned, as adults, we're already overwhelmed with so many obligations
Yep.
that sometimes we lose connections to ourselves. So I always like to say, like, think back to when you were a kid, when we did have as many responsibilities, hopefully, and think about, like, what did you like doing in the past that maybe you're not doing now? Most likely, most of us as a kids had like our favorite toy or activity or something creative or a sport or something like that that we used to take part in, that we've kind of let go because we prioritize other parts of our lives. And a lot of times, re-engaging in those activities, because our interests don't necessarily go away if we were doing them a lot when we were children. And it doesn't have to be super young, when you're a child, but any part in your like life before now, basically.
Right. So really thinking about what you might have been interested in at some point in your life. Like I know when I was a kid, I was an avid reader. I still am. So that's something that I definitely, incorporate as I guess you can call it a hobby, but being an avid reader, I also loved acting and singing as a kid. And so there have been times in my life where I've been able to actually do that, like join community theater and actually be able to perform. But if that opportunity isn't there, I do find with sewing as sort of being that creative outlet, because I'm, essentially creating costumes, which is brings me a lot of joy. so so yeah, great advice. Like think about in your life what were you into and what might you want to get back into that you used to pursue?
And you can also think about, what things draw your interest now. Like, what types of books are you reading at this point in your life? What shows do you like watching? Are they mysteries versus sci-fi versus reality TV? Who knows? What podcasts are you listening to? What are the topics of conversations you're having at work, just randomly with people that don't have to do with work necessarily, but anything that you realize like that keeps coming up in your life as well could be a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. What about those folks that think hobbies are things that only retired people do, like little old ladies knitting or going out and playing golf? Like, what would you say to those folks?
Yeah. I guess sometimes when we think of hobbies, that does come to mind. Maybe it's the way it's being portrayed in media or something like that. But I would say a hobby can come from almost any interest. Um,
Mhm.
they don't have to revolve around those things that we're hearing about a lot. It does, I think probably the most common categories we hear are going to be sports or arts or something like that.
Yeah.
But, I'll just throw out a few examples there. If you like puzzles or trivia or something like that, you watch Jeopardy, which has come up a lot recently. Maybe for you, a good hobby would be trying to find a trivia night or joining a trivia team or something like that, which we may not think of naturally when we're thinking of let's find an activity to do. Um, I work with, we work with food, we're dietitians, but I work with a
Mhm.
lot of people who say they love food, which is a great thing.
Yes, it is.
Um, and there's tons of groups out there where you could take food tours with different cuisines. You could join a dining club, a social dining club. Just activities like that that aren't, just obvious. But there's
Right.
tons of things to try out. I can keep
Even
going with examples, but I don't know.
right. Well, even like even looking at gardening, if you're into food, you might want to try growing your own. I don't. I just want to eat the food, but I'm sure there are people that may enjoy gardening. And then you can use that to find other people with similar interests if that's something that appeals to you, like finding a local gardening club or going to your kind of local gardening place where they might
Mhm.
be having classes. And right now during the pandemic, even leveraging social media, I mean, I have to say with sewing, that's a huge outlet for me, because the places where I'm getting patterns and fabric, they have uh, Facebook groups, and so it's really helpful to connect with other people that maybe I'm never going to meet physically, but you kind of get to know some of the people in the groups, and
Mhm.
even sort of showing a garment that did not go your way and saying like, what do I do with this? It's way too big here. And having people offer some suggestions on like, how you can do it next time to improve. It's just social media, I think, can also help in this way, especially right now where physical meetings are not as prevalent.
Allowed, yes. You're
Yep.
actually reminding me of something that came up over this summer, which probably most of us are aware of, but all the protests, all the social injustices that are happening
Mhm.
right now in the world, which have always been happening, but thanks to social media and news outlets, right? Those have, I guess, people's awareness have been increased, which I think is a great thing. And so another idea that might not be as obvious, if you were or starting to become more passionate about public policy or social justices, joining like an online activist group or finding things like that to connect with, those can be considered hobbies too. Whether you're protesting with people through social media, online, doing good in that way, or when the time is allowed to be more involved physically in person.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, pretty
Right.
much nowadays on social media, you can find any interest there.
You
Yeah.
definitely can. And, you might need to weed through some of them to find the right and most helpful area for you, but it can definitely be an outlet. One misconception that I often hear about with interests or hobbies, especially for those of us who might be perfectionists, we think we need to be like perfect at the hobby like, right away or ever. Like we were striving for perfection, right? Any thoughts on that? On like maybe how to reduce that?
Yeah, just tell yourself that's not true. You don't. I mean, take your story on sewing, right? You said that there were so many things that you threw into the scrap pile in the beginning, but you didn't give up. There was still some value you were getting out of it. And so if you enjoy something, and maybe even if you're not great at it, you might even find that more challenging. Another reason to keep pursuing the hobby. I would say as long as you enjoy something, it's worth doing. Um, I've also heard from, unfortunately, I would say I've heard that, and maybe this comes from, different generations, different cultures, different areas, but that hobbies can be a waste of a time because you're not necessarily being productive. So let's say if someone knew that
Uh,
you were making those clothes and you were just wasting material, throwing them out, what's the point, right? You're not doing anything good for anybody. I don't think any of that's true either, right? If you're enjoying it and you feel like you're more complete as a person, engaging your mind, your body in this activity, fostering your creativity, your brain power, right? And you think it's worth your time and energy, then I'd say keep doing it as long as you're not causing harm to anybody. like just
right.
just go with what you like. Like that's one of the most important things I'd say with just overall health and wellness in general is do stuff that makes you feel good and happy and balanced.
Yeah, that it doesn't always have to have like enjoyment, pleasure could be reason enough to do
Yeah.
something. You don't have to have other reasons. Enjoyment and pleasure could be enough. Yeah, that's great. Great piece of advice. So once somebody has investigated their interests and they're thinking, oh, maybe this could be a hobby, what are some steps that someone can take to start experimenting with it?
Yeah. I'd say, try to find once you, I guess, identify your interest, what you're looking for, check out, areas or events that might be going on that you can participate in. So you mentioned looking at social media, but looking at, local organizations that are around, a lot of places, gyms, coffee shops, libraries, community colleges, they're constantly posting stuff nowadays, a lot more online for obvious reasons, but sometimes on, boards in their locations. See if there's any, classes, events, activities that you'd want to sign up for. And then really start making a list. If you've identified your interests, things you might want to try out, write it all down, keep a list, see which one, you might want to start with. And I would say just an activity and just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens if somebody thinks, oh, like how much time should they give to a hobby before deciding maybe this isn't for me? I don't know. What are your suggestions on that?
That can be tricky because there could be a lot of reasons why, you're holding yourself back. Personally, I'm a very shy person. I don't consider myself outgoing by any means. Um, but there's a lot of things I'm interested in. And so maybe my first time going to an event where I don't know anybody, they're all brand new to me, or this activity is new to me too, I might be a little bit more self-conscious. I might be a little more reserved. And that can definitely skew your perception of how the event went. Maybe you felt like you didn't necessarily connect with anyone right away. But if there was something that you got out of it, even just a little bit, I would say go again, try it again, because you'll start to feel more comfortable. If you really, really, really didn't enjoy yourself, it's okay to let it go. Sometimes things aren't what we expect them to be. It doesn't mean that your interest isn't valid, but maybe it was the wrong activity for that interest.
Mhm.
Um, but I would usually recommend give it more than one shot just because, we know first impressions aren't always the right impressions. And that applies to this situation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. I mean, giving it a couple tries. And then if you legitimately are not interested in it, Okay. And I think that's a great time to sort of debrief on why you are not necessarily interested, or what were you hoping to get out of it, and what other activities on your list that you made might help you sort of fill, what it is that you're hoping to get out of a hobby.
If you didn't like it, I definitely encourage reflecting on why, because
Mhm.
that in itself can help identify what activity you might want to try next, or what interest. Or maybe this is an interest you just want to keep to yourself, right? And not have it
Right.
where it's engaging with other people.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think we were talking about food, and we like to eat food. And I thought maybe because I like food, I would love to garden. And I like the idea of like nurturing something and like growing, and me just going out. I had this vision of myself just going out to the garden and picking the herbs. And I tried a couple times. It's just not my thing. I just not my thing. I find it I'm not good at it. No. Nor do I find it particularly enjoyable to be like digging in the dirt and researching when to plant what. So what I figured out was like cooking is a little bit more to my a more kind of creative food outlet. Like I like to find things that we enjoy in the restaurant, my husband and I, and then how can we recreate that at home? So that gave me the outlet I was looking for with food. So I like eating it, not so much growing it.
Yeah.
But I did give it a couple tries, and then I determined, oh yeah, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah. And I'll say this is where keeping an open mind is important, because me knowing you and that you love food and love going to farmers markets and always telling me like these new things that you're finding, trying new veggies, things like that. I would have assumed, if you had asked my advice, I'd say, hey, try gardening. But sometimes, that obvious first thought isn't the right one, which is why keeping an open mind, making that list and really brainstorming different ideas to try out is worthwhile. Yeah.
And not getting discouraged with that, to recognize that, okay, I don't really like this, or I'm not really interested in this, is not like a reflection on your moral character, right? You can move on to something else, it's fine. And recognize, what, I didn't like that for these reasons. This is what I was hoping to get out of it. Let me see if there's something else that I can try.
Yeah. Most of the time you don't know until you try.
It's true. That's
Yeah.
definitely true. Yeah.
Like,
Um, so as we sort of come to the end of our conversation today, any last thoughts or takeaways that you would want people to know about?
um, I would say, one thing we didn't touch on is we were talking about what are some stereotypical ideas of what hobbies are. And
Right.
so, a lot of times we think of, oh, we have to sign up for a class or a course. Those are some of the examples we mentioned, right? Like taking a tour. But they don't have to be expensive. You don't have to spend money on them necessarily. So if that is a concern and something that might be holding you back, maintaining your budget is really important. So, but maintaining, engaging in your interests is equally as important. But there's ways to kind of branch out, engage in activities that don't necessarily also cost anything or cost a lot. And so these are just things to think about. If there are barriers that you're thinking about in that sense, it's a good idea, to brainstorm, really do that research that we were talking about, and see if there's ways to still engage in your interests that aren't going to break your budget as well. Um, but I'd say other than that, I think we covered most of the things today.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Um, would you like to summarize what we talked about today? So, like, can you bullet out what are the most important things to think about here?
Yeah. Start with thinking about your interest. Make a list. I encourage list making all the time. There's something about getting it out of your brain onto paper. And also, you have it as a reference. You don't have to do it all over again later. Um, think about how your interests can transcribe into activities. Do that research we were talking about, around the community, online. And then think about which one you want to start with, which one's piquing your interest, but also which one might fit your schedule the best at this time too. There are things that maybe you really, really want to do, but realistically now's not the ideal time for that. It doesn't mean you'll never get to it, but engaging in some kind of interest, some kind of hobby is probably going to benefit you. And then just go for it. Just do it.
Just do it.
Just
I
do it
love
with
it.
an open mind.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for mentioning that again. Really keeping that open mind and not comparing yourself or really judging yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Actually, yeah, we didn't mention that, but that is so important. And as I was saying, like that first experience, if you're a little more reserved, that's your nature, and you see these other people really being outgoing, like don't let that intimidate you.
That's right.
Everybody's a different personality. You can't compare yourself to others. Really get in tune with how you're feeling personally about the activity.
Absolutely. Remember, we talked about this being about pleasure and being about joy, and comparison is the thief of joy. So don't let it take away your enjoyment of these activities.
The idea is to help you feel more stress relief, not more stress from,
That's right.
those negative thoughts.
Absolutely. Maxine, thank you so much for joining me today on this discussion about hobbies. For those of you who want to learn more, you can visit our Be Well website. You can also potentially engage with one of our health coaches to dive into this a little bit deeper. But thanks so much, Maxine. Really appreciate you having you here today.
It was fun. I love talking about this topic.
Awesome. All right. Until next time, everyone, take care and be well.